stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the man from Ling. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am kicking off my reviews of the player cards in Threads of Fate, the first Mythos pack in the Forgotten Age cycle. That's right, we are looking at the Guardian cards, and there are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. There are 2 cards for each class in this Mythos pack, so without further ado, let's get started. The first Guardian card in the pack is Scene of the Crime. It's a 2-cost event with combat and intellect skill icons and the insight and bold traits. It has the game text, play only as your first action. Discover 1 clue at your location, 2 clues instead if there is an enemy at that location. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. Guardians, other than Roland Banks, have very few ways to help them gather clues. In fact, there is only 1 card, that being Evidence, the 1-cost event from the core set that lets you discover 1 clue at your location after you defeat an enemy. Evidence rewards Guardians for doing what comes naturally, and it makes the cut in many Guardian decks for that reason. The double intellect skill icons on the card are awfully nice to have in your deck as well. Scene of the Crime is a powerful addition to the Guardian class. Like Mano a Mano from the Pallid Mask, Scene of the Crime has the bold keyword, which means you must play it as your first action or not at all. That is somewhat restrictive, although there are ways around it. For example, with the sole exception of Leo Anderson, all Guardian investigators can use the Seeker event shortcut if there are no clues or enemies at your Guardian's location. You can play shortcut to reposition yourself before you take your first action, and then you can play Scene of the Crime to reap the rewards. When you play Scene of the Crime, you get to discover a clue at your location without making a skill test, 2 clues if there is an enemy at that location. Discovering clues without having to make a skill test is an extremely powerful ability, especially if you're expecting to encounter a lot of high shroud locations, or you enjoy playing on hard or expert difficulty where the Chaos Bag can be a big issue. 2 resources is a little bit more than I'd like to pay in Guardian, but if you do run into a high shroud location, Scene of the Crime is almost guaranteed to get you out of a jam. The same can't be said about other tools such as Flashlight. It's worth noting that you don't need to be engaged with an enemy to discover the 2 clues, you just need to be at the same location. That leads me to believe that Scene of the Crime is slightly better in multiplayer than solo, since there's a good chance an enemy will show up if your group is drawing 3 or 4 encounter cards per turn. If you want to make sure there's an enemy at your location to maximize the benefit you get from Scene of the Crime, you can play it in combination with On the Hunt, the Guardian event from Black Star's Rise, which guarantees that you will, well, almost guarantees that you will pull an enemy during the encounter phase. I've been testing Scene of the Crime in my solo Zoe Samaras deck. Unfortunately, I don't have much to report about the experiment. In the games I've played so far, I either haven't drawn Scene of the Crime or I've drawn it too late to be of any use. I'm hoping that Scene of the Crime will be a suitable replacement for Drawn to the Flame, freeing up 2 of Zoe's off-class card slots. However, I'm going to need to play a few more games with it before I'm ready to commit to that sort of switch. Scene of the Crime is a lot more restrictive than Drawn to the Flame. It's not free either, which could be problematic for Guardians, most of whom tend to run pretty lean on resources. There is a lot to like about Scene of the Crime. The ability to discover a clue or 2 without making a skill test is nothing short of amazing. Positioning is important, however, so try to end your turn on locations with clues, if at all possible, if you are playing Scene of the Crime, just in case you draw an enemy during the Mythos phase and you can take advantage of its game text to discover 2 clues. That said, there are a few ways to work around that bold keyword if you need to reposition yourself to get the most out of this card. I'm a little worried about the card's resource cost, but I don't know for certain whether that's going to be a significant problem until I've had a chance to test it further. The second Guardian card in the pack is Marksmanship. It's a 2-cost event that costs 1 experience point. It has combat and agility skill icons and the tactic trait. It has the game text Fast. Play when you activate the fight ability on a firearm or ranged asset. This attack can target an enemy at a connecting location. Ignore the aloof and retaliate keywords for this attack. If this attack succeeds against an enemy not engaged with you, the attack deals +1 damage. It's ironic the soldier in Alexander Kozachenko's awesome art here appears to be armed with a Springfield M1903, a Guardian asset that was released in the Undimensioned and Unseen Mythos pack. I think we can all agree that it was only a matter of time before we saw a card that enabled investigators to shoot at enemies at connecting locations, and the Springfield M1903 seemed like the perfect opportunity to introduce that type of effect to the game. Unfortunately, there are a lot of problems that hamstring the Springfield. So many problems, in fact, that I think you can make a very strong argument that it is easily among the weakest cards that was released during the Dunwich Legacy cycle. Marksmanship works almost exactly how the Springfield M1903 should have worked. In fact, it works even better than I imagined, since it deals damage in addition to the bonus damage from the firearm or ranged asset. Unfortunately, Marksmanship is not an asset itself. It's a one-shot event that costs 2 resources in a class that has a lot of expensive toys vying for limited resources. There are pros and cons to Marksmanship. On the plus side, it generates action advantage, moving to a location, engaging an enemy engaged with another investigator, and then killing that enemy. Choose up precious actions. Marksmanship will save you at least 2 actions, and quite possibly more if that bonus damage is enough to defeat the enemy in 1 shot rather than 2. I also like the fact that Marksmanship provides a shot in the arm to every Guardian or Rogue firearm from the lowly 41 Derringer all the way up to the powerful Lightning gun. On the downside, the fact that Marksmanship is an event makes it quite situational, which is just another way of saying it's got a higher opportunity cost than I would like. Before you can even think about taking a bead on an enemy with Marksmanship, you need to draw a firearm and Marksmanship, play the firearm, and then find an enemy that is not engaged with you to enjoy all the benefits of playing the card. It's certainly not impossible to pull off this sort of combination, but it does require some setup, which you need to account for if you want to snipe enemies. Guardians can mitigate some of the setup requirements by playing Stick to the Plan, the permanent asset from Black Star's Rise. Marksmanship is a tactic, so you can search your deck for it and place it on Stick to the Plan before you draw your opening hand. And so once you play your gun, you're good to go. Of course, Stick to the Plan is exceptional, so that's going to set you back 6 experience points before you can even begin to consider purchasing Marksmanship. Now, there are certain situations, such as scenarios that feature bosses, where Marksmanship is going to really shine. The ability to take pot shots at Umardoth, Silas Bishop, Yog-Sothoth, Hastur, or the Harbinger of Elusia from a distance is awesome. You're going to be able to pull off this trick only once or twice per game, but you should be able to connect for some extra damage and possibly avoid an attack by the boss during the following enemy phase, which is pretty valuable. Marksmanship is also useful against enemies with the Hunter keyword, especially hunters that don't spawn at your location. I'm thinking of an enemy such as the Lupine Thrall from the Dunwich Legacy campaign. If a hunter is in hot pursuit, you eventually run into a dilemma. You've either got to eat an attack from the hunter when it catches you, or you've got to lose some tempo as you backtrack to intercept the hunter. Marksmanship gives you the option to snipe the hunter from a connecting location, minimizing that tempo hit. Finally, Marksmanship is a great way to deal with the Man in the Pallid Mask during the Path to Carcosa campaign. The Man in the Pallid Mask usually enters play at a location off the beaten track, so the ability to snipe him without having to spend an action to move to his location, engage him, and then attack him once or twice is certainly a welcome addition to the game. If marksmanship was an asset rather than an event, I think it would be a slam dunk. As it stands, I think the pros outweigh the cons. Marksmanship isn't the first card that I'm going to purchase with experience points, but it's certainly worth a look to flesh out your build once you've picked up some of the essentials and you've got, if you're going the firearms route and you want to be able to shoot at enemies at a connecting location a little bit later in the campaign, then marksmanship is certainly worth a look. That's going to do it for my look at the Guardian cards in Threads of Fate. Guardians do very well in this pack. The ability to discover clues without making a skill test is extremely valuable, so I expect Scene of the Crime to make the cut in solo and multiplayer decks. I haven't had much success with it in my solo Zoe deck, but I've played relatively few games with it so far. I'm fairly confident that it will earn a permanent home either alone or in combination with On the Hunt to make sure that there is an enemy at my location if I need to discover clues. Marksmanship feels a little bit more situational, but it has the potential to save you quite a few actions if you play your cards right. Most campaigns we've seen so far seem to conclude with some sort of boss fight, and there's nothing marksmanship likes more than large, slow-moving targets that you can shoot at from a distance. It's definitely worth considering on a scenario-by-scenario basis, especially if you can stack it on Stick to the Plan before you draw your opening hand. That's going to do it for my review. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.